What's going on, guys? Scar coming at you with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we diving into the various formats in Magic the Gathering, kind of give you a little bit of a breakdown of what there is to play in Magic the Gathering, especially if you're a new player. You may not be that familiar with the various formats that there are in MTG Arena, let alone in Magic in general. I know some players are people who have come playing from physical to more the digital, just because it's a lot easier with what's going on in today's world. But there's also people who are just new to the game, and you know, it's one of those things that seems very daunting. The game doesn't really do too much, like, really to explain what the difference is, and being a new player, you don't want to play a format not realizing maybe that format is you know, a little bit more expanded or a little bit more limited in a way that has a different bit of a learning curve than your traditional formats in the game. With that being said, guys, if you like the video, hit that like button. It definitely helps out the channel a lot. If you want to post more videos, hit that subscribe button. But let's dive into the video and break everything down. All right, so first and foremost, the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to probably, you know, see that little top thing over there where it says like decks and it says standard. I'm just going to kind of break everything down. We're going to start in standard, being the first one, getting used to it. As you can see here, I do have a lot of standard decks currently in my library. Looks like I have 47 of them. Holy crap. But you know, the standard is the most common format in Magic the Gathering Arena. It's the one that's usually the most updated out of all of them, as the card pool is always updated in a way that every few months we get a new set. It adds to the current standard meta as a whole. And the usual standard meta is about it gets rotated once every year in September, usually once like the new set comes out. So when Zendikar Rising came out, we rotated out of a lot of the Ravnica stuff in the previous standard rotation. So when this next September comes out in 2021, we'll rotate out of like the stuff from the Ikoria and that area there. So like companions and stuff will be going, and we'll finally be getting rid of Throne of Eldraine, which I think a lot of people will be very excited about. The one also benefit of this set is that because it's always changing, the meta is always shifting around as we get new cards. New cards interact differently with certain decks then perform better. We get maybe even entirely new deck types out of, you know, a meta as a whole, especially around rotation time, because that's when a lot of things get, the card pool is very limited, so a lot of the decks are very temperamental. And as much as a deck could be good in September, it's fairly rare unless like there's some really good cards for a deck to be really good for the whole standard season. I mean, there are the typical couple cards, especially in the best of one meta, with mono red being that kind of deck that kind of sits, that you kind of see in the meta as a whole. But I feel like in the way of aggro decks in general, I feel like as certain mechanics and things come out, those kind of tend to rotate more often. With that being said, like I said, this is kind of like the most new player friendly, I guess, in a way, just because the card pool is much smaller. There's less cards that you have to like invest into to really make a competitive standard deck. As we get into the other formats and things like that, you'll see that it's a lot more daunting. You know, if you're unsure of like what cards that you want to buy for standard are, especially if you're buying packs in the store, if you actually go to the store and go to packs, just in case you may have not noticed this, if you actually look here, anything that's marked white is technically standard legal. So if you invest in any of this stuff, it's good to go for, you know, the next year or so. Anything from Zendikar Rising, and once we start getting the newer sets, those will be good for the next 2 years. So M21, Ikoria, you know, Throne, Theros, and Throne, these cards will be rotated in the next September rotation. The way that, like I said, the way that works is, you know, once every year that happens. But I already kind of talked about that, so I don't want to keep on going. But if you're ever unsure, this is like your best way to make sure that you're buying the right packs for standard if you don't want to, you know, invest in something, you know, that you're unsure about. So the next format is actually historic. I actually only have one historic deck currently in my deck list of things crafted, which is a very simple, very cheap, you know, blue white tempo style deck. The one thing that's different about historic is that technically in historic is kind of like all the sets that are currently MTG Arena kind of set. So anything that you see in the store pack wise is technically a historic legal card. You know, it's one of those things that they do have a banned and restricted list, just like standard does. So things are banned that you can't technically play, and I'm sure you, once you like kind of build into it, you can kind of see those red highlighted cards that that are unable to be played. The ban list is, I think, definitely different than definitely different than standard. I feel like there's a couple similar cards, but there's some cards that are just completely not there that are able to play, that are playable in standard. I think this is one of those sets, as currently it's called historic, but I think as they start expanding more and more cards into this, I think eventually this is going to actually get shifted into Pioneer, which is kind of like another set or another kind of format in Magic that essentially it goes from the Return to Ravnica, which is the previous which is like all the way back, and newer. I think as we get like these newer sets, eventually historic will just become the Pioneer of MTG Arena, which is essentially a much smaller card pool, which I think dates back to like 2013 or 2012. I think is when those sets go all the way back. So I think as we kind of get more and more MTG Arena content, we'll kind of get more and more cards. Though I could say that maybe that's not the thing, just because I know there's some cards in historic that are playable that are definitely from older sets. But I mean, it's one of those things I guess we'll have to wait and see. But like I said, historic, unlike standard, literally allows you to play any cards that are currently in MTG Arena in packs, all the way back to, I think right now, what Amonkhet is the oldest set currently in MTG Arena, like full pack set wise, that you can buy packs for. And I know there's also, you know, the couple anthologies that have like various other cards that are older. But that is what really historic is. It's kind of like standard, but it's a little, you just have a little bit larger of a card pool, definitely a little bit tougher to get into, but there are definitely budget options that you can definitely strive for if you do want to play this set. Definitely an interesting style to play, definitely a different format or meta overall. I honestly don't know off the top of my head what the meta deck is. I think Goblins is still up there, but I could be wrong. This deck is actually pretty solid too, but you know, it's definitely a different kind of swing of things if you do want to play something a little bit different than what the current standard meta is. So this next set up is actually Brawl, which is essentially like Commander in a way, but Brawl is kind of like Commander but for standard in a sense, unless it's historic Brawl, which I think occasionally happens sometimes in MTG Arena. But essentially what Brawl is you get a commander, or you know, your guy here, and essentially you can build a deck based on his mana colors. So right now I have Garrick, Cursed Huntsman, as my commander, and I can build a deck including black, green, and or colorless cards, which are artifacts, and I can essentially build a deck around that. Essentially the way the deck works is that it's a typical 60 card deck, but you're only allowed to play one copy of any particular card in the deck other than basic lands. So essentially that's why this card pool looks so crazy, and it's definitely a little bit different of a change, as it's a little bit different of how things work. Besides you having you can only play single copies of cards, your life total starts at 25. You can, you know, once you can play your commander from your commander zone at any point, kind of like how companions you were initially when they first came out. But you just have to pay the mana cost. If your companion does get removed from the battlefield, you have a choice of putting it back in the commander zone, and then essentially you can repay it, but it's gonna be a little bit more expensive the second time you play it. And other than that, I mean, the format's pretty cool. There are certain decks that are definitely really, really good in this, just because you know, you're playing you're playing like various legendaries. You're allowed to have access to a little bit more. I think this actual Brawl deck is actually one of the better ones, just because of the color choices. There's just various things that just make it that much better. But like I said, if you ever want to take like a little break from the current, you know, other standard or historic meta, this is definitely a format that's pretty cool, and essentially it's not too expensive to get into, just because you only really need one copy of everything. So if you have like, you know, a rare or two of this, you can easily build into it. Like, it's not going to be, sure, there's a lot of rares that you're eventually gonna have to, you know, rares and mythics that you're gonna have to, but you can always make do with the playing like uncommons and things like that. And because it's only single copies, not having certain cards is not the biggest of deals, just because, you know, it's still a hard time to technically draw what you're looking for. But definitely a cool format overall. The other note I didn't really mention is that the commander actually has to be a legendary creature and or planeswalker. So essentially it's like your commander is a legendary creature. So that is the other thing that is also special to the format. So the next formats are the limited formats, which are drafts and or sealed events. And essentially there's the difference between the two drafts. You can either do the premier or the quick. The premier is the one where you play with players in the pool of 8 players, and essentially what this format is, you get 3 packs. You open the first pack, you take one card from it, and then you pass it to one direction, and then essentially you you and the pool of players go through these packs that you guys each open, build, pick out cards of particular color, particular strategy, and then you then open up the second pack. This is definitely another good intro way. It helps you figure out deck building and synergies and things like that. It's definitely a good to kind of pick up those kind of skills if you're not very familiar with them. It can be kind of daunting at times, but as you do more and more of this, you kind of understand how certain cards work with one another. And overall, it's definitely a very interesting kind of format to get into. Like I said, you don't have to bring anything to the table other than possibly paying the entry fees to get into this, but essentially you're using whatever cards you pull from this as your deck, so there is no deck construction that has to go into this prior to it. And essentially what you're trying to do is build a 40 card deck, and then you play against players, and probably I'm blocking it in the camera, but behind me there are actually pool like win-ins that you get from playing in this format. Like this one in particular, you get a pack even if you don't win. You get another pack if you get one win. You get 4 packs if you get 2 wins, and you get 1,000 gems, and then you get 3,000 gems and 6 packs if you get 3 wins. I think I'm in the one that's actually possibly not against players. I'm not really sure. I thought there was more games, but I think this one, if you lose 2 games, you're done. So essentially it's very interesting in that sense. I just realized I'm in the traditional one, so this is best 2 out of 3. That's the one I'm in. That is another thing that I didn't go over in the other things, but there's ones where you play single games. You don't have to play against the same player, best 2 out of 3 games. But that is another thing that's in Magic the Gathering. So I was actually going through and I was trying to find a sealed event, and it actually doesn't look like MTG Arena is running a sealed event. So essentially the difference between draft and sealed is in sealed you get actually 6 packs, so you get 3 more packs, but the difference is you're not passing around the packs, so you're kind of making a deck out of the 6 packs you actually open up. So essentially that's the only real way it's different. You're still building a 40 card deck, you're still playing against players until you get to whatever winnings you get to in the particular event. So essentially it's just, yet again, you're building out of the card pool that you're given by entry. You don't have to bring anything to the table beforehand, and it's like helping yourself learn how to deck build using a very limited pool of cards. You can get very lucky and get really good cards, you can get very unlucky and get very crappy cards, but if you can put together cards that synergize very well together, you can still pull out some good wins and get some good prizes out of the overall thing. So MTG Arena has various other formats that come from time to time. These formats could be anywhere from a pauper format, which is 60 card decks, no maximum hand size, can only play commons, so essentially it is a common filled deck that you can just play 60 cards. It creates a very, very limited card pool just because there are decently good commons, but overall it's definitely a very more limited format in that sense. Definitely new player friendly too, essentially just because you only need commons. There's also Singleton, which is kind of like Commander minus the Commander. Essentially it's in the name. Singleton is 60 card decks, but you can only play 1 copy of a card other than basic lands. There was Pioneer that I did mention, which is kind of like an expanded format that is like historic, but it's a little bit more expanded because it includes more sets. It currently isn't in MTG Arena, but from what I did in my research, I did actually find that this is a format that could be coming to MTG Arena in the near future. I just think it's one of those things that I think by them slowly added in the various sets that they are adding into like the older formats, it's something that eventually I think Historic's just going to become, and maybe Historic will still be a thing, but I think eventually Pioneer will come in that sense. And then on top of it, there's also special events that you may see pop up from time to time. Actually, if you look above me, there's one for Festival on the Edge. Depending on when you watch this video, that may or may not be the actual event that is going on. But essentially, if you click on it, Festival on the Edge is essentially just a little bit of a thing. You get some special prizes if you win out. This one looks like it's, the special thing about it is that you can only bring a 60 card deck, including the cards from the past 3 sets, which include Ikoria, Core 2021, and Zendikar Rising. So essentially it's playing anything from this year for the most part, minus I think Theros. But that's the only thing. And then there's usually some special rule like this one here, you can't play Omnath. So essentially they're not following the exact stand and banned list. So I think Uro is actually still good in this format, but this is one of those things that pop up from time to time. It adds unique prizes that you can eventually win into. It looks like you can play until the event ends, so if you really want this last prize at 6 wins, you can definitely play until you get to that point. And you know, there's usually not too much of an investment just because it's like a little bit of a fun event. There's sometimes ones where they give you a pre-selected card deck and you just maybe choose which one you want to play. Sometimes you get just a ginormous deck of like 250 cards and there's no mana, and just, you know, you draw like 3 cards and you just play, you know, cards in your hand and play things like that. There's usually some fun things like that that you can also do. Now getting back into real quick about historic and traditional, there's actually events that you can do as well for these things. Like for example, you can enter a standard event, which is kind of like, you know, if you ever play physical Magic, it's like kind of like a little mini tournament essentially, but you're playing against randoms, and essentially, you know, as you play you can eventually win a lot of gold. I think at some point they had gems, but I think they kind of got out of that just because I guess people were doing too well. So for 500 gold or 95 gems, personally, if you're only winning gold, I'd only invest in gold. You really need 4 more wins to either break even, but once you get to 4 wins, everything after that is, you know, extra. So that's always a fun thing to try out. Essentially, if you just want to kind of like, instead of playing ranked or playing just to play queue, you can always play like this if you have some extra coin and maybe want to try to earn some extra coin if you feel comfortable enough that you have a decent deck. The same thing goes for historic. There's also historic events that you do essentially the same exact thing. Outside of that, I did briefly mention in one of the other things, there is traditional formats, which is like you would play in actual Magic the Gathering tournaments, which is best 2 out of 3 games. You can do it for standard and historic, and essentially what it is that it actually is just you play, you know, best 2 out of 3 in games. So essentially you want to come with a 6-card deck that also includes a sideboard. So it's one of those things that you have to kind of get a little bit more technical, understand what cards could be good to cycle in and out in between games, and it does take a little bit longer because you are playing against a single you know, you're playing against a single opponent up to 3 times, depending how well you do. And essentially in the event, for example, you can actually win a lot more. It looks like you win 2100 gold, but it does cost a little bit more to enter. It looks like 2 wins actually breaks even, which is not bad, but I guess, you know, it's one of those formats that, you know, even if you win the first game, once the sideboards happen, it could swing the way in your opponent's favor depending on the matchup. But it is one of those things that if you do want to play a more traditional style Magic the Gathering instead of the best of one, it's one of those things that are available to you, whether it's in an event and or in a ranked ladder. It's something that also, as I think as a player, if you do ever want to play competitive Magic, it's something that you do want to acquire as a skill and maybe practice in playing some traditional events, you know, just to kind of get an understanding of how it works to play against the same opponent multiple times, and then figuring out the skill of sideboarding cards to hopefully, you know, get yourself in a better place deck wise to maybe play against your particular opponent's deck. You know, if your opponent's playing rogues, you may have cards in your sideboard that are good against rogues, instead of building a deck that has some maybe utility in it initially to kind of combat rogues like in the best of one meta. But with that being said, guys, these are some formats I figured I'd help explain to you guys. If there's any questions, let me know down in the comments below. I try my best to answer any questions. If you like the video, hit that like button. It definitely helps out a lot with, you know, whatever, I guess, engagement on YouTube. I don't really know. And if you want to post more videos, hit that subscribe button. We are kind of creeping up on that 1,000 subscribers, which is pretty cool. But until next time, I will see you in the next video.